Okay, welcome everyone. We'll let people begin to trickle in, but while people are trickling in, we're gonna start up. So, welcome to this important discussion around ethics in cell and gene therapies. My name's Tim Hunt. I'm the CEO at ARM, and for those of you that heard sort of the introductory remarks I made yesterday, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. We kicked off a project in January of this year to do more work on essentially 4 areas that come up a lot in our space. One is, and we're going to discuss 3 of the 4 topics today. The first topic is around pricing and value and this balance, this tricky balance, but important balance of driving high innovation, ensuring patient access, and then looking at the sustainability of the model within cell and gene therapy. So that's the first one we'll start off with. The second one is really around the industrialization of the field and how hopefully that will lead to greater global access. And then the third topic, which we're not going to address today, but is the topic of a panel tomorrow that I would encourage everybody to attend, is the unique challenges of the ultra-rare model as it relates to cell and gene therapy. So that one we're not going to touch on today. But the last one, and it's timely for a couple reasons, the last one is around how do we think about scientific engagement and needed and appropriate guardrails around what we call frontier technologies. And it's somewhat timely because we had both former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb talking about that as it relates to sort of these rogue stem cell clinics and some work he did some years ago to try to crack down on them. And I woke today to an article in Stat that my old friend Dr. He, the guy from China who delivered the world's first CRISPR babies, is back in the news, and some Silicon Valley executives are trying to encourage him to do some more of his work. So a little preview, that'll be the final topic we'll get into. But I'm really delighted to be joined on the stage here with some longtime friends and some new acquaintances. I'm gonna have everybody introduce themselves, starting with Sarah.
Hey, Tim, thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm Sarah Emond. I'm the president and CEO of ICER, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review. We'll talk a little more about ICER, but for those who aren't familiar, independent nonprofit conducting value assessment to help the system know what is a fair price for what we pay for in healthcare.
Thank you. Kevin.
So good morning. It's great to be with you this morning. My name's Kevin FitzGerald. As you can tell from my outfit, I'm actually a Catholic priest. I'm a Jesuit. I also happen to have a Ph.D. in molecular genetics and a Ph.D. in bioethics. So I'm the chair of medical humanities at Creighton University, and we have a medical school here in Phoenix and as well as one up in Omaha. So I've done a lot of work and spent a lot of time in this intersection between genetic technologies, advancements, and the ethical and social issues that they raise. So that's why I'm thrilled to be here with you today.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Miguel.
Thanks, Tim. Good morning, everybody. My name is Miguel Forte. I'm the CEO of Kiji Therapeutics and also member of the board of ARM and president of the International Society of Cell and Gene Therapy. The topic today is very dear to my heart for multiple reasons, not only the work I do at ARM, but the work and the vision I have for ISCT. And I would call it move from reactive ethics to proactive ethics. Deal with things before they happen. Deal with things proactively so that we can control the agenda and not be controlled by the agenda.
Great. Thank you, Miguel. Fran.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fran Gregory. I am the Vice President of Emerging Therapies at Cardinal Health. I'm a pharmacist by training, not your traditional pharmacist. Have had a lengthy experience and career focused on high-cost, complex therapies. Never thought I would see the day when we're talking about gene editing and cell therapy technology that we have at our fingertips today. So really important topic for me as well, just thinking about how the patient, at the end of all of our discussions, how the patient can or cannot benefit from these treatments, and the importance of what we do every day to make sure that what we do is ethical and that we do everything that we can to get the patients the treatments that they need. So thanks everyone for being here today.
Great, thank you, Fran. Thanks everybody. So let's start off with pricing, value. I'm gonna start, Sarah, with you, pricing, value, and that, like I said, that important balance, and I admit it's easier said than done most days, but that balance of innovation, access, and sustainability. Maybe take people through how ICER thinks about these topics broadly, and then maybe specifically drilling in a little bit to cell and gene therapy and how you guys see it. You've done a lot of pioneering work in this area for sure.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the overarching principle that we take to thinking about these questions is trying to balance a fair price should be met with fair access by the payer and purchaser community, and then we have enough revenue and incentive for the next round of innovation that we want. So that is much easier said than done, and so it's very much in the details of how we do that things can get interesting. But the idea is that you can look at the evidence produced through a clinical trial program, through real world evidence, whatever the source may be, and you can calculate the price that matches the benefit that patients receive. And the fundamental approach to thinking of how much we pay for that health gain is rooted in the ethical principle of opportunity cost. Meaning when we overspend for health, we are actually harming unseen people in the healthcare system, right? So think about when healthcare insurance premiums go up, people become uninsured or underinsured. They forego care, having harm up to including death. So the approach of value assessment is to say, here's how much we should pay for a unit of health so that we're protecting the unseen people in the system, but then we also are rewarding true innovation, because that approach says you get to charge more when your drug works really well, which is the case often with gene therapies. So it's been a really interesting experience for us as an organization. We've been looking at many of the gene therapies that have come to market. We try to put our work out right around the time of FDA approval so that we can be part of a conversation about fair price. And in many cases, these therapies command prices in the millions of dollars because they're bringing transformational benefits to these patients. Even if you don't believe the durability of effect and it's only 5 years or 7 years, in many cases, that's still worth a whole lot of money because of how serious many of the conditions are that we look at. But what we have to balance is not thinking that every cell and gene therapy commands that price, because they don't all work great, right? So some work better than others. And so that's the sort of independent look at that evidence and the idea of scaling it to the benefit that patients receive that we bring to the conversation, because we do want to be able to have that sustainable access piece. And I'm sure we're going to get into how we need to be evolving our payment system to be thinking about paying for that kind of value. Yeah. But that's something we think a lot about.
That is an excellent segue over to Fran, who has given this a lot of thought. And Fran, so your background, you're not just now an executive at Cardinal, but also we're at Novartis. So you've got kind of a unique view from your seat on a few of these things. How are payers thinking about it? How is coverage shaping up, both in the commercial setting, but also Medicaid, Medicare from your vantage point? And where would you kind of grade them on the modernizing of this field to embrace these new modalities in general?
Great questions. That was a lot. To unpack. So as background also, I was a 15-year payer, so very familiar with how payers think about covering high-cost therapies, and then, of course, several years in pharma as well. And now I have the privilege at Cardinal to work with payers and pharma providers and really see viewpoints from every stakeholder that is really involved in getting these valuable treatments to patients. So from a payer perspective, I think, I would kind of highlight two things really. Number one is the thought of population healthcare, right? Payers are really good at managing very large populations of members, beneficiaries' health, and the fact that they, are very large PBMs, can negotiate price discounts and get drugs to patients at very, very high volumes. Many of the payers that we work with have, many, many millions of members. Payers and PBMs are really, backed by pharmacists like myself, but, in the back room, we have actuaries, many, many, many actuaries. And the whole point is to mitigate risk. So if you think about a product for obesity, for example, millions of people want these products, and it's kind of easy to see what the outcomes are, right? Because there's a million patients that you can kind of look at and observe what the outcome looks like. When a payer's trying to evaluate outcomes and value, ICER comes into very, very much play when we're looking at, you know, what is the value of this product? What should the price be? It's really a different model because it's not population healthcare anymore. It's population healthcare for an N of 1 at a time. So it's a whole different way of viewing things. It's no longer formularies, preferred, non-preferred. It's, okay, we have a multi-million-dollar product for a person who we are responsible for providing health insurance benefits for. What in the heck are we gonna do? So I think that's a question that is honestly yet to be answered. I don't know that we're there yet. I think payers are struggling mightily with trying to figure out how do they balance the value of these products, which they recognize 100%, with looking at what's available today, 20, 25 products plus or minus, and 200 in the pipeline, right? Like, how do we manage that? Thinking about not only today, but in the future. And, you know, are these products all going to continue to be priced at the point where they are today? Yes, they might command that, but how can we as an industry figure out how to make that more sustainable long term? So that's kind of the population healthcare piece of it. I think what else is really interesting and that I've seen kind of materialize over really the last 8-10 years is that different lines of business, commercial, Medicare, Medicaid, are not equal, unfortunately. Patients do not receive equal care. Patients do not receive equal priority in these different lines of business. It's not, you know, all the time a certain line of business is not treated with equity, but there are certain instances, and we've seen that time and time again, and it is a huge challenge because these products are not something that anyone wants to lose 100% of their investment in. Providers are concerned with getting reimbursed. So, you know, there is a significant challenge there with just thinking about health equity in the terms of, you know, who is your payer? You know, are you a commercial? Are you Medicare? Are you Medicaid? And how are you going to be treated? And is that really right? It's a huge challenge. It's a huge question, and it really goes back to not anyone wanting to do the wrong thing, but everyone wanting to make sure that they don't lose everything in trying to do the right thing.
That's great. Yeah, I always struggle a little bit, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, that the sort of one-time, potentially durable effect is in some ways a very different animal than, it is a very different animal than I'm taking a pill to manage my blood pressure every day. Yep. It's almost more akin to surgery or transplants or whatever, things that are $1 million plus price tag, but could have a very durable effect for many years. But the systems aren't sort of built for that yet. Right. So it's something I think probably many of us are trying to see if we can accelerate into the future.
Absolutely.
But Kevin, give us your take on all of this and how do you see it, and then we'll go to Miguel.
Yeah, first of all, I have to admit the scientist side of me is exceptionally excited and actually relieved because some of you may recall back in the late 80s, French Anderson was walking around talking about using gene therapy for ADA SCID. And that sort of lit the fire at the time, but then it's been so long coming. And part, I think, of the reason for that is, from what Miguel was talking about, we've been doing reactive ethics, right? Let's try to get ready for when things go wrong, right? And then we'll try to figure out a way to justify what we were attempting to do. And if one looks at it now in terms of the very hopes that we have for this technology, like Sarah, you said, it is transformational. What is the transformation that not we anticipate, but the patient anticipates, and the patient family anticipates, and the community anticipates? That's a really interesting question to ask now. And the reason I bring that up is because, and again, spoiler alert, when you get to the stat article, one of the aspects that figures prominently is this idea there are groups that are heavily invested in full speed ahead. And yes, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, and if most of the eggs are broken, that's still okay. It's just a bigger omelet for the rest of us who are left. So is that the goal, right? And if it isn't the goal, how do we then get together? I do believe this is called the alliance, right? How do we ally with one another to try to achieve the goals that we foresee and the ones that the patients, their families, and their communities desire? Because that might not be exactly the vision that we have currently. And that, I think, is the big lesson for us to learn. It's a lesson, certainly, people in biotechnology and agriculture learned the hard way with the GMOs. Again, great technology, amazing stuff. I went into human genetics because if you've ever done plant genetics, that's really crazy. So what they could do was amazing. And of course, it just sparked this incredible controversy. And it has not been resolved yet. So do we want to avoid that? One way to do that, I think, is to broadly engage. It's interesting, in the article that came out this morning, one of the reporters noted, right before Dr. Ha, I think that's how he pronounces it, but anyway, came out with his announcement about the genetically engineered embryos. There was a lot of concern in the genetic treatment arena for doing broad engagement with different population groups. Since that time, that's gone away. That call for that has gone away, which is fascinating to me, because I think that is indeed the only way this goes forward. And it goes forward in a way where everybody is willing to understand, accept the risks, but also celebrate the achievements.
Right. Good, thank you. Miguel.
Before we go there, I think we still have to go back and move the fields on the value, pricing, and consequently the access. I started my career as an infectious disease physician, and then as a regulator, I was part of making decisions. And treating a chest infection with an antibiotic is pretty easy, right? You make a decision, you pay, you forget, and let's move on to the next one. We're in a different thing. We're bringing long-term value. We're bringing cures. So it's a completely different model. And if you see about all the discussions that we're having on the meeting here, I mean, we're all already accustomed to the science, right? We're all, I mean, it's a given factor. We saw the meeting before the wonders of gene editing, the wonders of curing disease. We also saw the regulators saying, okay, we're more comfortable, platform approach, we know how to do this, we're prepared to take risk. So we've done a great job about evolving the scientific awareness and the regulatory willingness. We need now, at the moment where patients need to have access, and this access needs to be paid for, to evolve the next layer, which is the payers and the decisions on the access, really, the final step of the access. Access brings a lot of other things, and I think we'll come back to that, but it's a bit like this. We develop products. Let's talk to the regulators. The regulators said, it's yes, okay. And then suddenly we've got products to go into the market and say, oh, we need to get them paid for. That's what we are now discussing. That's now the layer of people, the groups that we need to evolve and change to bring the value discussion, to bring new models, to enable the economical part of the access that comes with other things as well.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Let's talk about, let's build on that, at the access piece and how we see the industrialization of the field. You know, a lot of people in our community, a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, are playing an active role in a strategic supplier, a tools company, consulting firms. trying to think about how do you drive down costs, how do you drive up yields, how do you think about scaling, how do you think about improved analytics, lots of things that will go into making these therapies more broadly available, yes, in the US and Europe, for sure, which is a real issue, but also then, I would argue, globally. And maybe, I touched on this briefly yesterday in my talk, but I think a lot of, I repeat it because I think if I keep saying it, I'll actually start to believe it because it sort of defies belief, but Zolgensma is available in more than 50 markets around the world, right? If you'd said to me 5-10 years ago, hey, I got this idea of a gene therapy that's going to be in 50 markets, including Brazil and Ecuador and Egypt, I would have said you're crazy, right? Like, but they figured out a way, and I heard that there's another therapy that's very broadly available, but I want to double check it before I announce it here on stage. But so you see at least a model for success there, and again, I touched on this yesterday, a number of our members are working on in vivo sickle cell treatments. These are long, complex bets. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, but I've talked to a few of them. They're like, look, this would transform, if we could do it well, it would transform care here, but also around the world, and 80% of the patients are not in the US or Europe, right, with sickle cell disease. So with that long wind up, Kevin, we've talked about this topic and global access quite a bit. We got some of our friends together with Miguel when we were in Rome and met up with some of your buddies at the Vatican, and I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart as well. Maybe just share some thoughts on global access.
Yeah,
Then I'll go to
again,
Miguel.
and I agree with Miguel. You know, there are stages to this process, and we are at that stage where you have to engage the payers. But I think at the same time, we have to also look more broadly and ask ourselves, just for instance, we have now 2 amazing gene therapies for sickle cell. Where are most of the patients going to be in the world, globally? Do we take that into consideration in terms of how we structure things now, even just regionally? So I have to admit, I first saw this saying about 20 years ago, and it was referenced to an indigenous community in South Africa. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? So what far is it that we have envisioned for where these technologies will go? Is it just for North America? Is it just for North America and Europe? Is it just for certain places where we can set up a particular system of payment? Or are we going to be open to a much broader expanse for these treatments, especially in terms of the fact that, okay, we're kind of picking and choosing our targets now, right? But as the technology develops, as we get various different options using base transfers and every kind of thing, then the question will be, all right, what criteria will we use then for deciding what we're going to develop and who's going to benefit? So that gets back to the whole global access question.
Yeah, and maybe just because you enlightened me on this a little bit, one of the reasons why the Catholic Church is so vested in this global access is because you've got a little bit of healthcare in a couple of places around the world, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
but
just tell everybody about
we
that.
might be the most extensive healthcare organization in the world, right? You've got to give the nuns credit. They went everywhere. There was no place they would not go. And so we have clinics all around the world. In fact, I was part of a project about 7-8 years ago where we tried to find out where all of it is, and it's still not possible to figure it all out. So the beauty of that, though, is we can go to any community and engage with them. And again, start this dialogue and say, we have come up with these, what we think are amazing opportunities. What do you think? What would be an amazing opportunity for you? And don't be surprised if what comes back is, we would like clean water.
Right.
Right? I mean, if you're going to talk about something that's efficacious, right, clean water is pretty much right up there.
Pretty good
So,
start, yeah. Miguel, so you, among the many hats Miguel Forte wears, one, which I don't think you touched on, is you're also the president of ISCT, the International Society of Cell and Gene Therapy. So you do have a unique perspective, I would argue, on global access, not just in the day job, not just the fact that you live in Europe, but and were born in Portugal and live in Belgium, but you're every time I talk to you, you're on a trip coming back from some interesting place. So.
Yes, I mean, obviously at ISCT, and my mantra there is global presence for local impact, because we do have a global responsibility. I mean, access is a responsibility and a multifactorial element. We all have a responsibility to patients that have an unmet medical need for which we have a solution or a potential solution for providing the access. And it's important that we think of that not just where it's easier the discussion, not necessarily easy, but easier the discussion where there is affordability versus where it's more difficult the discussion. And we need to take that discussion and have that responsibility. It's an ethical responsibility for patients in need for us to work on the access. Now, it's also a responsibility for the patients in the future, not just the patients today, which is the sustainability of the system. We cannot just say, well, let's treat this patient today no matter what, and actually then torpedo the system and then kill opportunities in the future in terms of investment and sustainability of the system. It's not an easy balance, but it is an important balance that we need to address, and we have a responsibility to do that. That's why I believe it's part of the discussion here today. It's an ethical discussion. Now, but there's a lot that goes into it, and it's access, as you said, the nuns went everywhere, but it's also to teach the nuns to do it properly, right? Which is access, workforce development. It is all the factors that really go into the technology development that facilitate the access. We cannot just work on solving the equation of the payment. We have to solve the equation of the cost, the development, the investment, the knowledge, the access, the medical practice. I mean, clean water. Yes, you can't really talk about, well, advanced therapies if you don't solve the basic conditions to treat these patients, to enable the technical healthcare. So it is addressing the question. It is thinking all of these elements that we as a group need to take care for. What I would like to see down the road, and I was delighted with the vision at the panel before, is, and I think we talked about this, as Steve Jobs said, about the computers. Down the road, people are going to spend a lot of time in front of computers, and they're going to ask themselves, was it any time different than this? I mean, is it not the usual thing? Cell and gene therapy needs to get to that point where we say, was it ever different?
Right.
But there's a lot of work to be done on that, and we need to address the difficult questions, not have an oysterous attitude, because otherwise we'll get nowhere.
It's like that Steve Jobs line reminds me of when I talk to my 15-year-old, be like, remember when I was your age, there was no internet. It's just, I can't, I shouldn't even know what to say, no. It's so foreign. Well, and the other thing though, Miguel,
you check the Wi-Fi access before you turn on the light, right? When you get to know.
Well, the other thing that we've spent time on in other venues is, that there's some challenges in Europe with access, in that we've seen products get approved but not found reimbursement. Maybe the most prolific one was the Bluebird beta thalassemia drug. So this access issue, as Fran noted as well, is a complex one here in the U.S. and in Europe and across the globe. So it's a very complex one. And Fran, maybe just go over to you a little bit. How do you see this world of over the next 10 years, as we try to industrialize things, make products more available around the world? Like, what's your crystal ball?
Yeah, I have no crystal ball, but I do have some experience in problem solving in similar, maybe more simple situations. And one of the things that I always think about when I am, trying to help solve some of these challenges that we're facing in the cell and gene world with, innovative payment models and, different types of annuity programs that we could put together, payer-to-payer collaboration where there's, not one payer worried about one member for 4 years, but how do we collaborate across payers, in the US and globally as well. how does that start to look? And one of the examples that is way more simple, but it's kind of the same, it reminds me of the same problem that we're trying to solve today, was, in 2014, I think, when the hepatitis C drugs came to market. And we were like, wait, we have millions and millions of people globally with hepatitis C. This is one of the most prevalent conditions in people over the age of 65. So, in the US, we had to figure out how in the heck are we going to deal with this? We want everyone to have it because in the world of drugs, we've been asking for cures. We've been asking pharmaceutical manufacturers for cures. We don't want to treat patients forever for the same condition. Let's figure out how to cure it. And then a cure comes along and we're like, whoa, wait a second, what in the heck do we do with this? So it's kind of a similar situation now. But guess what? We figured it out. It took us a couple years, and it kind of broke the Medicare system for just a quick minute. But we figured it out, and every patient in the U.S. and even globally, probably shouldn't blanket statement that, but access has become very, very available to many, many, many millions of people because we figured out innovative payment models for hepatitis C products. And now fast forward 10 years, we have to be innovative on a much higher level. We have to be innovative in a much more globally collaborative level. We have to be innovative in a less selfish way. This isn't about one, payer system or one country, or it's about how do we all figure this out so that we don't block future innovation. Everyone wants these products to be successful, so creating innovative payment models, being really, really thoughtful from the pharmaceutical manufacturer side and the payer side, and the providers as well, with, is how can we figure this out financially so that we don't all need to get paid on day one? Because this patient's condition might be a day one treatment, but what do those outcomes look like over a period of time? And how do we figure out what is the value of day one versus the rest of that patient's life? And that's a really tough question to answer. But I can say I think we're getting there. We're doing a lot in the, outcomes-based contracting is becoming a bigger, more talked about thing. Provider engagement and helping better track outcomes, that's always been a challenge in this space. We have to know how these patients do to define the value of those outcomes. So really, every stakeholder has to be invested in this and has to do their part, less selfishly than in the past, to make this work. And I'm an optimist, and I do think we're getting there. I think we're making so much progress. Looking, over the last 10 years and where we are today, we're definitely getting there. We have a long way to go. But we're not sitting here doing nothing, which is a good thing.
Well, and many of us were observing or witnessing the hepatitis C issues back in, I think, 2014, 15, 16, right? And I remember being stunned. I'm like, I thought this is what everybody wanted. It's a 12-week course of therapy, no interferon. Highly curative, right? And it was $84,000.
$1,000 a day, we thought that was a big deal, right?
Right.
Not a big deal.
Skip forward to the gene therapies of today, a little bit more, right? But it was a very interesting reaction. And I remember talking to the chief medical officer of one of the very biggest PBMs and saying, I thought this is exactly what you wanted. He said, well, it came a little quicker than we thought, and the patient population took off, and we kind of weren't ready for it. But that is an interesting, Sarah, let me go over to you and get your thoughts on all this, but it is an interesting thought about almost building on what Miguel said earlier, how do you get ahead of some problems? In some ways, the challenges we're seeing now on access are maybe a foretaste to what is coming when we move into bigger patient populations. And I know you've given that a lot of thought, and we've talked about it a little bit too. So just maybe share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that I know that a lot of us who think about this issue a lot go, God, what would we have told ourselves 6 years ago to be ready right now for the uptake of multi-million-dollar but fairly priced gene therapies? And then I have my cynical moments where I was like, I'm not sure it would have mattered, because we have to acknowledge that we have a system where there's a whole bunch of people making a lot of money off of the status quo. So change is hard. And so the approach that PBMs have taken, that payers have taken, that manufacturers have taken to price have served them until this point. And so Hep C is a very instructive one because it did blow things up. And yes, it's what we wanted, but the budget impact was crushing people because you couldn't find the money. You know, Medicaid departments couldn't just raise taxes to suddenly like treat everyone with hepatitis C. So it forced this reckoning of, yes, this is the innovation that we want, but we also have to figure out how to pay for it. And so as we think about what's coming with gene therapies for larger populations, and I know, and we've talked to many companies that we've done reviews of their gene therapies, there's still a very high cost of manufacture, which is not necessarily one of the things you take into account when you think about value. You think about how much it helps patients. You're kind of agnostic as to how much it costs to develop or how much it costs to make. But in gene therapies, it actually is significantly important because there's a real cost for developing these therapies for the course of treatment. And I don't think that we should expect our healthcare system to be able to pay millions of dollars for a drug for a gene therapy for high cholesterol. I don't think we're going to get there. And so we need that innovation on the manufacturing side to bring that cost down and so that the return on investment for the innovator is still there. Because maybe you could charge, don't quote me, maybe you could charge $100,000 for that and you have such a big population, you're still getting that return on investment that you need for that next wave of innovation. Maybe a little higher? All right, that's fair. It's your meeting. A little higher than that. And so
House rules.
So I think that's one of the things that's important to talk about now because, and I'm not the expert on the pipeline that many of you are in the audience, whether it's 3, 5, or 10 years from now that we're going to be faced with that. Okay, we've got millions of people. I've heard there's a GLP-1 gene therapy program. That's like everybody, right? I mean, that's you put it in the water territory. But I don't think that we can expect a healthcare system to come up with the money to pay the multi-million dollars for the gene therapy. So we have to be doing something on the development costs.
Yeah.
Or the production costs.
Miguel, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to say two things. Sure, I mean, there's a change for volume to price, right? I mean, which is part of it. And underscoring it must be the technology and technology development for sure. But there's also another thing, and back to Zolgensma and the fact that there's a lot of countries where it's been commercialized. Access is a multifactorial, so there's multiple things that make a product being used. Sure. And it's part of launching it properly to actually address all those elements. And so we're seeing a success story where an appropriate launch was done, considering how to use it, how to convince the users, how to address the payers. It is addressing all those elements of the multifactorial characteristic of the use of these products that will enable to do an appropriate launch and succeed on the uptake of these products. I mean, there's financial elements, but there is technical, educational, launch properly. I've launched products before, even if the products were part of existing technology, there's a lot to be done to make sure that there's an adequate adoption by all stakeholders that will enable the use of that product. Yeah.
If I could, if you don't mind, I want to amplify one of the things that Miguel said, because the other piece that, and I know this has been a theme in some other sessions, we need to be thinking about as a community is the education piece for the patient community. And we've done, the science is ahead of where I think society is to be ready. So we might actually get a gene therapy that could cure high cholesterol. We got a lot of work to do to convince people to take it. And so that piece of it is a part of this approach of thinking of being less reactive, to Miguel, your first point, and more proactive, and how are we educating people about what gene therapy is and what it's not, and why it does represent an advancement that you might want to consider for your own health.
Yeah, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the key, there's just one little piece here, and education certainly is important, but there's been a ton of research done, and you can educate all you want, but if you don't engage and you don't find out what their values and goals are,
agreed.
Yeah, it's not going to go anywhere.
No, it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, it reminds me, I had a call, I don't know, a year ago maybe, with a very good member, a senior scientist for a very good member. We were talking about their technology, which is interesting, and the guy kept saying to me, I'd never met him before, he kept saying to me, but it's all about the data. It's all about the data. It's all about the data. And after like the 5th time, I couldn't take it anymore. And I finally said, okay, I've just got to stop you. It's not, respectfully, it's not just all about the data. And he's like, looked at me like I'm a crazy person, right? And I said, okay, I agree that data is critically important. Maybe it's, you could argue, but where it fits, maybe it's the biggest piece of the puzzle, but it's not the puzzle. And he was sort of looking at me like I'm a kook. And I said, okay, if it was all about the data, wouldn't everybody have been vaccinated for COVID in your world?
Right.
And he's like, I'm like, it's not all about the data. And building on what you said earlier, Kevin, like, and wouldn't like all of Germany be eating GMOs like 3 meals a day, right? Like, it's not just about the data. You get these products, they get produced, they can be transformative, Sarah, just like you're indicating, and then it meets society, which is why we call this ethics in society, because it then lands into people that have rational fears and irrational fears and emotions, and that they love the data and some struggle with the data. Like, it's a complex ecosystem that these things then enter, payers being one very important component of this big mix, but it does make for a complexity. I'm going to get to our last topic, and if we may have time at the end. If we do, maybe we can do like lightning round, and I can ask everybody, what are 2 things that people would want to take away when you think about ethics in society? And Fran, when we'll hit the last question, but then I'd start with you, go to Sarah, and then to Miguel and Kevin. But before we get to that, I touched on this earlier. I woke up this morning and there's this article, and it made my head throb. So I was in Hong Kong when Dr. He announced that these gene-edited twins had been brought into the world, and it's not the kind of thing you forget very easily. But the article was pretty disturbing. If people get a chance to read it, I would encourage that. It's a lengthy article, so the reporter put time in. Like I said, it made my head throb a little bit. So, Kevin, you've given this topic some thought over many, many, many years, and germline editing was a thing not long ago that Francis Collins said, there's a red line that should not be crossed, and then it got crossed. But there are people out on the margins that are scratching at this issue today that want a piece of that action at some level. And tell us your views.
Well, yeah, again, like many of the things we've already talked about, this is multifactorial, but 2 things have to be taken into consideration when you're dealing with these supposed red lines, right? So the red line between somatic cell and germline. And again, most of the discussion that has been around that line is a matter of safety, right? Somatic cell, something goes wrong, all right, it's not the end of the world. Germline, something goes wrong, well, it may in fact be the end of the world. If you need an example of that, just think of gene drives. Why aren't we using gene drives to wipe out mosquitoes and malaria? There's a good reason, it's the end of the world. All right, so we have those technical issues, but at the same time, there are also the cultural and societal issues that often get set aside because they're complex and they're difficult. And again, if you look at the research, Verlinsky is a great guy to check out on this. You're not going to change people's minds overnight, certainly not societies. So in the article, which is interesting, you have a couple of groups that are really pushing hard on this. One would be China, like officially from a political perspective. They see bionationalism as one of their ways to, again, achieve dominance in the world. And then, of course, Silicon Valley, where you have a group of very wealthy people who are very tech savvy and technophiles. They think technology can save everything. So when we're having these discussions, a question to ask yourself is, how do you engage with somebody who disagrees with you substantially and vehemently? Because we will encounter those groups. They are there, we know all about it, we went through COVID. How do we go about having those discussions? How do you even set up for having those discussions in a constructive way? And I think that's a very key. Again, this is not something new. It's been going on forever. There are different ways to approach this that are very effective, but you have to be aware of that as we move forward.
Yeah, great. Miguel, you've given this topic thought over some years as well. Maybe give your
Yeah.
perspectives on it.
Let's be clear, I don't have a solution.
Yeah. We're prognosticators on this panel. We don't have any direct accountability today.
But I said it on purpose because not being able to have a solution is not an excuse not to address it.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the most important message, is that we cannot avoid difficult discussions, need to tackle them. I'm a lot more comfortable with large population, multiple somatic gene, like you were saying, which I think it will happen and it will be great. Then the shaded area of eugenetics, really, which is kind of, let's make this better, right? Let's perfect the mechanism. We're definitely not there. I'm not sure when we should ever be there. And we need to make a clear difference between the two, and we need to define the guardrails. We also need to do that, I think, in a way, and Kevin, you used a saying before, I'll say another saying, which has always impressed me on an attitude. If you want to, and it's an Indian saying, Indian from India, not Indian from here, right? If you want to keep sand in your hand, you probably need to keep it open. The moment you start tightening it up, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose the control all of it. So one needs to implement and set those guardrails and really do it in an educational, kind of comprehensive and broad way. It's very difficult. And then whenever you see and identify things that go off, you really need to come hard on exposing and addressing them. When the first issue about the HIV receptor gene editing of those two twins, which, I mean, everybody at the time said there's not a very clear unmet medical need. Right. It is a kind of proof of concept experiment, which should not be done that way. And it was done with potentially a lot of agendas behind it, right? And clearly, people need to expose it and come out. And I remember at the time, with Bruce Levine, we were at ICT, we came out with a press release and we came out on a series of positions about it. That's what needs to be done. So we need to be on the lookout. While you want to be potentially gentle, you need to be on the lookout and then be hard on exposing it, condemning it, and bringing it to the light. It's not an easy exercise. It is our responsibility to do it. I also believe, as you pointed out, I mean, there are groups that say, let's go all the way. Technology will take us. I'm always bewildered with technology. It was very interesting. I was coming here and I was driving with my wife, and I saw a plane just came over. I said, I'm always in wonder when I see a plane flying. Yeah. Right? And then she said, well, it's great because it shows that we're always wonder about improvements on technology. So it's important that we develop technology. It's important that we experiment. It's important that we believe that we will do a lot more, but we should not be reckless about it, and we need to be really, really responsible. And it's the balance between innovation and breaking some eggs, but not all the eggs, right? How many eggs? I don't know. The balance between the two, I don't know. But probably the most important goes back to the beginning. How we're conscious that we don't have the solution, but part of the solution is keep talking about it and trying to address it.
Yeah.
Tim, can I just add one quick thing? The thing that struck me about that article that I think bears some note of caution as it relates to a lot of areas is the role of billionaire investors. And I'm just going to say maybe that quiet part out loud. When people have a lot of money and think that this is the next thing, there's not a lot we can really do about that, short of with government regulation and other things. And so I think it's kind of incumbent upon all of us to really note that, and where we can speak up about where we think ethically we should be making investment. And so there's a huge Silicon Valley push right now for anti-aging research. so that people can live longer. And we have people who can't get access to adequate mental health care in America and are dying because of it. And so like we're not using the billions to invest in how do we have a more healthy workforce for people who are teenagers struggling with mental illness, but we have billions of dollars going to anti-aging research. And to me, that's actually an ethical concern. And so I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
You're not saying that you're per se anti-billionaire
No.
by in and of itself, just
No.
as sort of how they
But,
allocate some of their resources.
Correct.
Yes,
I mean,
okay.
I think it's fair for society to have a conversation about the ethical priorities of our investments.
Yes.
I think, the flip side of that too, though, we talked about clean drinking water, mental health, treatment access. If you just focus on the basic needs, you never innovate, right? So I feel like there's got to be a balance. You have to have, for sure, access to the basic necessities and basic health care, which we are not there yet globally or in the US. But also, if you just focus on that, where are the people that are challenging the status quo?
Right.
Not that,
The balance is right.
not that what, the article that came out this morning kind of lean towards, billionaire investors becoming involved in germline cell research is right, but it's challenging us, right? We're talking about it. It's making us think, well, what is possible? What could we do if we did it right? So I think that's, the flip side of it. And I know two of the FDA speakers, Nicole Verdun and Rachel this morning, both mentioned, we want innovation, but we have to do it right and we have to be thoughtful about it. I really liked what Nicole said yesterday about, the FDA wants to release more guidances. We all love reading the guidances, right? But we're just kind of like always kind of catching up, right, with those guidances. And when, being involved in the launch of the first cell therapy approval, because sometimes I look back and think, what could we have done different then when getting that product out to market that maybe we could do better this time around, like maybe we can do better for some of this new research that's coming out that's very, very ethically questioned and challenged. So, maybe we need to think about things differently and just go about it a completely different way. What is that way? I don't know, but just when I look at the launch of the cell therapy and, is it a drug or is it not a drug? We were questioned very, very staunchly about the cell therapy when it was launching. Is this really a drug and do we need to pay for this as a drug? Or is it a treatment? Is it a medical device? What exactly is this? We're not really sure. So what if we started to define the next wave of innovation before it hit us? Well, we probably not like you said, but if we could be proactive and put those guardrails, and if it's guidance documents from the FDA in place proactively, then it would give people some freedom within that to go ahead and be innovative and go ahead and be exploratory without worrying about getting their hands slapped for going too far.
Yeah. Can I make a quick comment? Absolutely. I mean, we need to foster innovation, and I think it's our responsibility on innovation. It's interesting your point about, is it a medical device? Is it a treatment? Is it a product? I think as a regulator, I don't think it matters too much, as long as you then know which is the regulatory system that sets the guardrails, right? And I think the biggest discussion, and it was very important in Europe as well, and I was part of that, is if you classify it this way, then you know the set of rules that will be applied for it. If you classify it in a different way, there will be different rules, and you need to adjust the rules for it. In the end, it doesn't matter too much, because if you're this or that, as long as this or that has got a set of rules that guide the way you do things about it.
Yeah, great. All right, let's do lightning round. We'll do quick, less than 1 minute answers. Fran, we'll start with you. Just what are one or two things you'd like people to take away as you think about cell and gene therapy, ethics, and society?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is we have to be creative and innovative. The things that we did in the past don't work anymore when we're talking about patients who are, potentially going to die if they don't get a treatment versus treating, millions and millions of people with hypercholesterolemia. we need to be innovative and think completely differently about what we're doing. And again, I think we're getting there, but we have a really long way to go. And then also we have to keep on challenging ourselves that it's not good enough. You know, it's not good enough to charge $4 million for, and no, not saying $4 million about any particular drug. I'm saying multiple millions of dollars for a drug is just not okay. We have to figure out how to get past that, and there are so many things that go into that, and I know that. I work with manufacturers every day, and it is incredibly difficult. But we have to get past that because it's unsustainable, and if we can't make it sustainable, then you know it's going to be a real sad thing. So please continue to be innovative, continue to be creative, and you know, think about that patient who needs this treatment and what in the heck can we do differently to make it work.
Good, thanks. Sarah?
Yeah, I think my call is just to participate in the conversation about pricing and value assessment and consider it sort of an ethical imperative to be thinking about the implications of pricing decisions, participating in value assessment, how we think about measuring value. As you know, I think Father Kevin has said that beautifully today, the more we are engaged in a conversation about it is really the only way we're going to make progress. So please continue to be part of the conversation about how we balance this price and access challenge.
Great. Kevin, then Miguel.
Two things. One is, the reason I'm here is because of you. You are an exceptionally entrepreneurial and innovative group. But don't limit your innovation and your entrepreneurship to just technical development. You have an opportunity to set a new precedent in the world for how we have these discussions, how we do this engagement, what are the goals, because your technology is not always going to work. But what can always work is your outreach to people and them understanding why you do what you do. Imagine if they could come and grasp that. That might be a much greater achievement than anything you're ever going to achieve technically. So think about it that way in terms of the goal. To achieve that, number two, you're going to have to be just incredibly honest. One of the interesting things that very rarely gets mentioned about Dr. Hu's experiments is, sure, you can adapt the CCR5 gene to a configuration where it makes you resistant to HIV, but that same configuration makes you more susceptible to other infectious diseases. Why are we not talking about that? That's part of that balance that we always have to strike. So I think we also, in our engagement with the public, have to do some of that education and have to let people know these are complex issues.
Great, thank you. Miguel, finish us off.
Two things. One is tackle the difficult discussions, right? I think we need to have those discussions, and again, thank you, Tim, for your leadership at ARM to actually tackling those discussions, which I think it's a must. And we don't have solutions, but as I said before, part of the solution is discussing the problem. And then on another one is a bit more pragmatical point of view, which can lead to the first one, which is what are the challenges that we see today in our field, which is probably the manufacturing, the access, and the investment. Right? Investment at all levels, investment in terms of the innovation, but investment also in paying for these products. And this all comes together on innovate constantly so that we address that equation and consequently improve the access, because we do better manufacturing, technological development. We will be better about administering, launching, getting these products to patients. And so everybody else will see the return on investment and the value that we're paying for, and we'll do investment. So if we say it very simple, let's make sure we get these products to patients. And by enabling that access, we work on all those dials that really rev up the system and will keep us engaged and having fun in what we do.
Great. Miguel, we'll end it there. Thank you. Fran, Miguel, Kevin, Sarah, thank you for joining us today. Let's give this great panel a round of applause.